proliferate these nuclear weapons and cause problems elsewhere in the world. And you can't have a final solution, but you can do a certain number of things which visit punishment for behavior which is harmful to the global society.
Tell me what your philosophy is for the relevance and the future of Singapore.
If we want to make a living for ourselves, we've got to be extraordinary. There are any number of cities with 1 million, 2 million people in them. Hundreds in Asia, hundreds more worldwide. Why is Singapore different? It's because the people make it so. And the people, meaning our own people and the talent we have within Singapore, and the talent we can attract to Singapore and make members of our extended family who can help us to prosper and help us to make a living.
What do you consider members of the extended family?
People who come to Singapore and work, people who come to Singapore and strike roots, people who come and eventually become citizens.
Is Singapore's future as bright or brighter today than it was 5 years ago?
I would say so. I would say so. I mean, over the last 5 years, we've weathered SARS, well, a little bit longer than 5 years.
Right.
We've weathered the global financial crisis. We've come through, bounced back. We've just had our first quarter growth. Is
9% approaching.
13% over last year.
Right, right. And so for the 2010,
so
what do you expect?
For 2010, we're expecting 7 to 9%.
7 to 9.
Yeah. So we are on a good platform, not to cruise ahead, but to build for the future. And this is a platform on which we can say, now we've got the growth, let's get the transformation moving.
How did this happen?
I think firstly, we were lucky. The world picked up better than we expected. I think the American team, Paulson and Bernanke and Geithner, did a good job, and we are beneficiaries. Secondly, we had programs which we had launched, which are coming on stream now, like the casinos and integrated resorts, which you mentioned. And they are creating 20,000, 30,000 jobs for us. And it's coming on at a time, just as when the economy is picking up and generating a tremendous amount of buzz and a tremendous number of tourists and visitors who are paying attention to Singapore and writing about Singapore. Thirdly, I think we were lucky we did the right thing in the downturn last year.
Which was?
We decided to focus on saving jobs and keeping companies viable. So the government, we had resources, so the government helped to bear the social security expenses for workers. Companies worked with unions to keep workers employed, and therefore they were, firstly, we kept social cohesion, and secondly, when the moment came to pick up, they were ready to pick up and to increase production and go again. And so this year we are booming again.
So if you look back even further than that to the what might be called the Singapore miracle or the Singapore way, what was the essence of that?
Being put in a position where you have no choice but to do well. And then you get together and you work at it. We had no oil, no gas.
Right, no natural resources to sell.
No emigration.
Right.
And we had to make a living for ourselves.
So what did you do?
What did we do? We invested in education. We invested in public housing so that people would have a home to own and to defend. We built up our armed forces so we could be secure in an uncertain world. We built up our institutions so that you have a government which people can trust and is competent and can protect our interests in the international community. And the people supported the government and worked with the government. And that reservoir of trust is one of our most valuable and sustainable competitive advantages.
The reservoir of trust.
Yes.
Your father said to me, you have to stay relevant. You have to stay relevant.
Yes.
To the world.
Yes.
There are people today, when they talk about the Middle East specifically, they'll say this place could become the Singapore of the Middle East, meaning that if they concentrated, even if they don't have oil resources, they say this about the Palestinians. A Palestinian state become, because of the human resources talent there.
Well, we're happy to be a metaphor, but we remind ourselves that we have no safety nets and we can always fail if we get it wrong.
And what would get it wrong be?
If you don't have the right government, if you have the wrong policies, if you cause a loss of confidence. Supposing we were in the situation of Iceland or of Greece.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that.
Where would we be?
be out of...
Iceland is a friend of the EU. Greece is in the EU, so the Germans come riding to the rescue some way. But in Singapore, how will you ever come back?
And who would come to the rescue of Singapore?
Exactly.
If you had a huge debt problem.
Exactly. It'd be just another broken back country, permanently.
So you can't afford to be have that kind of financial crisis because you're not sure.
We can't afford to have
IMF is not going to be there
we
for
can't
you.
afford to have a disastrous bump in the night, whether it's
Yeah.
a financial crisis, whether it's a government misbehavior, whether it's a security problem. But we only have one chance to make a go of it. You can fail many. You can succeed in many battles. You fail once, it's finished.
It was not that long ago we had an Asian economic crisis.
10 years.
10 years ago,
Yeah.
right. There was also a Mexican crisis.
Yes.
We see the debt crisis in Greece.
Yes.
When you look at all the sovereign debt around the world, your father said to me the thing he worries most about is America's debt.
Yes. We all depend on America. You are the anchor for the whole system. You are the way people define AAA.
Yeah.
And if the AAA is defaultable, what happens to
What
the
do you
whole
believe
system?
in? Yes.
Where do you go?
So America has to get its economic house in order as a #1 priority for its leadership
for
in the
the
world.
long term. You have to get your economy stable. You are in you have a huge budget deficit. You have to do it because you needed to get out of the crisis last year. But in the long term, you have to balance your budget. And I was just talking to Alice Rivlin yesterday,
Yes.
who is chairing the Congressional Budget Committee, or Deficit Committee.
Right, right.
And she says it's a very serious problem. These are political decisions. They have to put forward proposals.
Do you think the American public has the political will and the political leaders have the political will to meet the crisis in the way that...
It's never easy to close a budget deficit. But when George W. Bush became president, he inherited a surplus from Bill Clinton.
Yes.
So you have been there before. And it is possible to get back there if there's the will and there's a bipartisanship.
What's your opinion of a value-added tax?
We have one. Whether you have one, I would not comment. I think politically you'll have a lot of difficulty introducing it.
You also have a sovereign wealth fund.
Yes.
Temasek, it's worth 100.
Temasek is not really a sovereign wealth fund. They have companies.
What is it? I don't understand the model. What is it then?
You're asking about Temasek?
Yeah.
Temasek owns a stable of companies.
Well, sovereign wealth funds own a stable of companies.
Sovereign wealth funds own a portfolio of financial assets.
But sometimes they buy entire companies. But
Sometimes.
Go ahead. Yeah. But go ahead. So you're different in what way?
Well, first of all, Temasek operates completely on commercial basis. We appoint their board.
Right.
But their board makes all the decisions, and the boards do not decide for the boards of the subsidiary and associate companies, because each of their companies, many of which are listed, have their own boards, and each one is accountable to all of their shareholders.
So it's more like a kind of giant sovereign private equity firm, except that it's owned by the government.
Except that Temasek is owned by the government, yes.
Do you have less confidence in American financial?
Not at all. I mean, you're asking me where I'm going to put my
Yes.
portfolio. These are decisions I leave to the portfolio managers. I'm not the portfolio manager.
No, you're not. But you're the prime minister, and it's owned by the government, and you have a responsibility to the people of Singapore to make sure
yes.
that they do well.
My responsibility is to make sure that I appoint that we have the right people managing the portfolio, that they make the right long-term decisions, taking into account the risks. It will maximize our returns over the long term, not every year, but on the whole portfolio basis. And my job is to provide them the political environment in which they can do their job without being distracted by the political flag.
Have you changed your philosophy about that since the economic crisis?
We review our strategic asset allocation from time to time. We make incremental adjustments, but we are long-term players, and we don't make major switches overnight.
How do you measure your commitment to democracy?
I think we measure it by the legitimacy of the government and by the results, how Singapore works and whether Singaporeans are able to have a better life.
Is it Jeffersonian democracy?
We don't measure ourselves by an American model to the how to